They called it charity night, but the arena smelled like bait. Floodlights turned the ring into a bright trap. The crowd came to see pride get bruised for a good cause. Vendors slung foam gloves, speakers thumped, laughter ran ahead of the bell. The poster promised 1 minute with the champ. The fine print was the crowd. Dax, diamond hands, Russo arrived gilded, silver robe, diamond trimmed trunks, security in 2 ranks. He tapped the turnbuckle like blessing a throne and shadowboxed for the cameras. The Jumbotron loved his angles, he loved being loved. Vince Harlow, his promoter, prowled with a mic. For the kids, he shouted. Who's brave enough to touch greatness? Just a minute. Harmless fun. The spotlight swept the seats. It found a boy in a navy hoodie, 4 rows up, quiet as a comma, Micah Cole. He'd come on a neighbor's spare ticket, planning to be spectator and student. The light made him a 3rd, spectacle. You, Harlow grinned. Up here, young lion. Zoe, Micah's best friend, squeezed his wrist. You don't owe them anything. He could stay seated and let the moment pass. He stood. The aisle felt a mile long. Hands slapped his shoulders, someone offered a paper cup, liquid courage. Which he waved off. The ring smelled like bleach over old sweat, a museum of last chances. Up close, Russo's polish looked expensive enough to be cruel. What's your name, little man? Russo asked into the mic. Micah. The name rolled around the bowl and came back bigger. He felt small and steady, like a nail laid on a rail before a train. You ever box? Russo's eyebrows made concern look generous. A little, Micah said. Kitchen footwork counted. Alley timing counted. His grandmother, Sergeant Cole to everyone else, had taught him to treat pressure like rain, let it hit, don't invite it in. Headgear, gloves, instructions. The ref murmured, 1 minute. Keep it playful. Touch gloves. Russo raised his knuckles with a smile that hid a dare. Micah touched them. Leather to leather feels like truth, plain, weighty, unimpressed by applause. Harlow played ringmaster. Remember, folks, this is fun. We're not here to hurt Micah. Laughter rolled. Zoe raised her phone. You're not alone, she whispered. The bell clapped. Russo flowed light on the balls of his feet, a tour guide in a museum he owned. He flicked a teasing jab toward Micah's forehead, the kind you brag about later. Micah didn't swat, he listened with his feet. Half step left, half step more, settling a quiet orbit, eyes on shoulders, not fists. Russo showboated, chin high for the cameras. The crowd hooped. Micah let himself be herded until the ropes touched his back. He rolled under a lazy hook, felt its wind comb his ear, and touched a knuckle to Russo's ribs, not hard, just punctuation. Russo's smile faltered. Oh, he said. The next jab arrived stiff, less friendly. Micah parried it across his chest and slid to center. Laughter thinned into interest. On the apron, Harlow signaled the ref to slow it down. Russo winked at a camera, but his breath had texture now. Micah heard it, breath, footfall, canvas squeak, the ring's little orchestra. Russo thumped a glove onto Micah's shoulder like a pat for a pet. The crowd laughed on cue. Micah absorbed the weight and discovered Russo's tell, a tiny hitch at the end of his exhale. If timing is a door, he'd found the squeak. 10 seconds. Russo squared, guard down, the poster pose. Micah didn't chase. He held stillness that bent the room. Silence pooled. Russo couldn't stand the quiet. He snapped a big jab toward the lens. Micah tilted right an inch. The glove kissed air. Micah's right hand arrived like a knock, small, precise, to the sternum. Not for damage, a reminder for balance. Russo's eyes flashed. The bell clapped. Applause spilled out, polite and late. Russo lifted his arms to gather praise faster. Micah lowered his gloves and stepped away like a man leaving a conversation he hadn't started. "Give it up for Micah," the announcer boomed. Coins of claps rained. The spotlight drifted off him. At the ropes, Russo leaned close, smile neat as a ruler. "Cute," he murmured. "Don't get ideas." "Too late," Micah said. He unlaced the gloves. Headgear off, the world sharpened, tack in the neutral post, sweat halo on the robe, the scuff missing from Russo's right boot. He catalogued it without trying. Zoe hugged him at the steps. Heartbeat. Steady. He glanced back. Russo posed for another camera. The crowd roared again, yet the pitch had shifted. Outside, air tasted like cool metal. Sirens stitched the far blocks. A bus exhaled. Micah's phone vibrated, classmates, cousins, strangers. Jokes. "You should have run." Threats disguised as jokes. One text from an unknown number, "Interesting hands, kid." He pocketed the phone and walked. Memory unfurled, his father's heavy bag patched with duct tape continents, his grandmother's clap, again. Again. Feet first. He passed a bar with the fight on TV. The replay froze on his right-hand landing, a dot on a poster god. He didn't stop. The train platform hummed under fluorescent shiver. A guard nodded like they shared a secret. Maybe the secret was that fear shrinks when you face it before anyone asks. Doors sighed. Micah watched his reflection ride beside him, hoodie dark, eyes bright. Around him, the city kept its rhythm. The bell echoed as a metronome. Above ground, a thin moon sat on rooftops. He fit his steps into sidewalk cracks, left, right, left. At his building door, he paused and looked back toward the arena glow. The roar had dulled to rumor. A line settled in his chest, "I don't need them to believe me for it to be true." Inside, the hallway light buzzed. Downstairs, where the heavy bag hung from a groaning bolt, he wrapped his hands. Knuckle. Knuckle. Cross the palm. Anchor the wrist. He pressed each fist to the other, set his feet, and let the night listen now. Micah didn't sleep, not truly. He lay in his narrow bed with the window cracked to the city's hush and watched the sign across the street blink like a lighthouse. When his eyes closed, the ring returned, just an instant stretched thin, his glove tapping Dax Russo's sternum and a sliver of shine leaking from the man's grin. A small truth had sounded. It rang now in his chest. Before dawn he slid into sweats and crept to the basement, where paint peeled and the heavy bag swung like a patient planet. He rapped with care, knuckle, knuckle, crossed the palm, then stood until his breath matched the chain's soft clink. Sergeant Cole taught stillness first. He jabbed without weight, tasting distance. 1-2. Roll. Pivot. His feet traced kitchen patterns. He worked until heat bloomed across his shoulders and the hook sang. Upstairs the kettle cried. His grandmother, gray crew, black pants, hair bound in a scarf with tiny lightning bolts, watched him enter like a scanner reading a code. Footwork, she asked. Always. She set tea down. I saw the clip, she said. Eyes on his shoulders. His breath stuttered. Good. Don't mistake a stutter for weakness. Sometimes it's rage learning a new language. He stirred the cup. What happened to Dad wasn't an accident. She looked toward the fire escape. You need to want the answer enough to let it change your life. I do. Then listen wider. School felt like walking through broken microphones. Voices came loud. Hey champ, show us the tap. You gonna fight for real? You lucky he played. Zoe waited at the doors, hoodie up, camera bag strapped like armor, eyes bright. Viral, she said. 200,000 views. Half clowning, half saying you made him blink. I made him breathe, Micah said. We're not letting them write the story, she replied. Come on. Your father's old gym. They skipped. Autumn held its breath. The storefront gym sat under a faded mural. Inside smelled of liniment and tape. Mr. Reynolds, who had trained champions and unclaimed men, looked up. If it isn't Sergeant's shadow and her light, he said. Here to hit, or to talk? Both, Zoe answered, lifting her phone. On the record? Truth don't care about records. Reynolds nodded toward a framed photo, Jerome, Lightning, Cole, grin off-center like he was stepping into joy. Lightning was the real thing. Not just hands, heart. He'd work the bag until sweat made moons on the floor. Then sweep them himself. What happened? Micah asked. Night before the bout, Reynolds said. We had a plan, keep him off the ropes, blink to the blind side, drown the big man late. He iced his hands, came back quiet. Hit the mitts and the rhythm was wrong, like a drummer with one ear blocked. Next day, second round, the wrist went on a hook. After that, doctors, promises, silence. He said the gloves felt funny. I checked. Regulation. Still, funny ain't the same as right. Dax's camp? Zoe asked. I ain't accusing, Reynolds said, which is another way to accuse softly. I'll say this. They watched our sparring more than they should, and Vince Harlow knows the exact weight of air when money's in it. I found a clip where Vince laughs about softening the storm in undercards, Zoe said. If we lay that under your words. Careful, Reynolds said. Truth without caution is a weapon. They worked the bag because grief asks to be metabolized. Reynolds corrected Micah's elbow once, then stopped there. The ring had begun teaching last night. Micah honored pauses instead of filling them, and the room eased. On the way out, an old man sweeping the stoop asked, You walking toward or away? Toward, Micah said. That's heavier, the man replied. At home a note waited on the fridge in tidy block letters, the past is loud when you chase it. Rest your ears between sirens. Soup warned. Micah studied after eating, but every problem folded into the same shape, a square ring, a breath that stuttered, a hand that could refuse violence. His phone buzzed. Unknown number, you're trending, kid. Meet? 9 p.m. Tally's Diner. Come alone. Zoe replied before he could send a screenshot. Already saw it. We're not stupid. I'll be there. Tally's had chrome edges and thin coffee. Vince Harlow slid into their booth smelling expensive in an unclean way. You're disciplined, he said. People love a humble kid who fights. I can make you rich. I'm not fighting, Micah answered. Not for you. Vince smiled with wolf patience. You think you've got a story, but stories need producers. Here's one: your father was fragile, his wrist would have gone anyway, you're milking a fluke. Or another: the champ gave a kid a moment, the kid spit on the gift. Which sells better? Zoe set her phone on the table, recording open. You said that out loud. He didn't look. You think that scares me? I am the echo. I am what follows your voice and makes a crowd. Don't chase ghosts, kid. Ghosts don't buy tickets. Micah watched coffee drip from pot to burner ring. I'm not chasing, he said. I'm listening. Vince stood, smoothing his tie. Careful with the truth. It doesn't care who it cuts. Outside, night deepened. A bus wheezed and scattered pigeons. He's scared, Zoe said. He's practiced, Micah replied. Scared will come later. They took the long way home so courage could cool. On the stoop, Sergeant Cole sat with a thermos. You met a salesman, she said. We met the echo, Micah answered. She handed him the thermos. Then make your own sound. In bed, the sign stuttered secrecy across the room. Micah didn't sleep but rested. Below, the heavy bag swayed because the building remembered. In the soft clink of chain he heard a whisper like his father naming a combination between laughter and prayer. He repeated it into the dark until words weren't words but breath-keeping time: listen, step, answer. He breathed, slow and even, until the ache turned into purpose and calm. Morning in the city felt. Micah woke with clarity like cold water. If the past was loud, as Sergeant said, then somewhere inside the noise lived a map. He made oatmeal, scribbled names on a receipt: Russo, Harlow, Commission, Gloves, Ortega, and met Zoe under a billboard of the champ's smile. We build a timeline, she said, unfurling tape and a foam board. Rule 1, receipts beat rumors. Rule 2, Micah said, we don't swing unless we're on balance. The records office smelled like dust making new plans. Permits, insurance claims, bout reports, the city hoarded paper. A clerk stamped forms and slid a stack across. They scanned. A pattern surfaced, bouts rescheduled with vague medical notes, sanction waivers signed hours before first bell, a venue fined for locker room irregularities, erased weeks later. Zoe marked dates in red. Micah drew lines that began to rhyme. Your father's fight, she murmured. The ledger called it a sprain, the equipment check read, passed. Below, in small print, a late-night cutman change. Who's L. Ortega? Luis Ortega, the clerk said. Old-school cutman. Worked both sides when money got foggy. Harbor Terrace, gazebo. Bring coffee. Harbor Terrace watched the river argue with wind. Ortega sat alone, hat low, hands scarred and careful even at rest. He eyed the coffee and the kids. You have the look, he said. Fire and a file. We have questions, Zoe said. About gloves. About a night. Everyone loves the myth of loaded gloves, Ortega sighed. Plaster, pennies, amateur theater. Pros hurt you with subtraction. Padding, Micah said. A millimeter is a sermon when the bell calls prayer, Ortega answered. Thin the knuckle felt, snip a thumb seam so the catch collapses, smear numbing gel at wrap time so the brain misreads the hand for 6 minutes, then wakes wrong. Could that wreck a wrist? Zoe asked. With fatigue and bad luck, yes, Ortega said. And Vince Harlow likes edges that look like fate. Did you work that night? Micah asked. I was scheduled. A kid in a blazer claimed the commission wanted a variety, and bumped me. The commission later said they never sent him. Next morning, the radio said lightning fell. Why didn't you speak? Zoe asked. Because whispers get poor men sued out of their apartments, Ortega said. Because I liked waking up. If we bring proof, will you go on record? Micah asked. In daylight, he said. Where my wife can see me nod. They left with his number and a list, a seamstress who tailored robes, a locker room attendant named Tino with St. Michael Inc., a cameraman who freelanced for streaming crews. Evidence survives in people who get paid last. Tino kept towels folded like origami and eyes that mapped exits. He met them behind a gym where heat and chalk breathed from bricks. I don't snitch, he said, voice tight. But truth ain't snitching when somebody's already bleeding. We want detail, not drama, Zoe said. Charity night, Harlow's deputy wheels in a cooler labeled water, Tino said. Heavy wrong. Inside? 2 pre-rolled wraps and a bottle that smelled like a pharmacy. They joked it was trainer cologne. Commission popped in early, nothing got used. But I've seen that skull logo bottle behind Russo's corner in old photos. Numbing agent? Micah asked. Or heat gel with a kicker, Tino said. Makes you feel immortal for 1 round. Then the joints remember blueprints. Pictures? Zoe asked. Tino lifted his shirt to show a body cam. I record so fines don't rewrite history. I got 2 minutes of them cracking that cooler. Can we copy? Zoe whispered. You can mirror, he said. I keep the master. The city changes when the poor keep receipts. At Zoe's table they built an altar to proof, Ortega's account, stills of the skull-capped bottle peeking into frames, Tino's clip mirrored to a USB, sanction letters with Harlow's notes scrawled in margins. Zoe cut a clean 30-second piece and laid Reynolds's caution, truth without caution is a weapon, under the footage like a bass line. We still need a mouth from inside the orbit, she said. Someone who can narrate the lie from within. His physio, said Sergeant Cole from the doorway, inevitable as gravity. People who tape bodies keep jarred secrets. She slid a card, Dr. Mara Ellison, PT, ATC. She taped your father at a clinic, Sergeant said. Turned down Russo's money. Said it smelled like shortcuts. Dr. Ellison's office was a garden of ligaments in bloom. She listened, then pulled a thin box from a cabinet. I keep refusals, she said. Contracts I didn't sign. A non-disclosure allowed, proprietary pre-bout hand-prep compounds, no ingredients listed, no independent tests. When I asked, Mr. Harlow said, trade secret. I said, traded elsewhere. Will you say that on camera? Zoe asked. I'll say it to my mother, Dr. Ellison said. You put the camera where she'd sit. On Zoe's wall, dates linked to names linked to invoices until the board had veins. In the center, she pinned 2 photos, Jerome, lightning, Cole smiling, Micah in the ring, guard up, eyes steady. Between them she wrote, we don't have to hit to hurt. How do we proceed? Micah asked. We let their own gravity collapse them, Zoe said. Drop weight on weak beams, one by one. The internet loves meteors, it respects landslides. Vince will try to frame us as bitter, Micah said. Then we sound like builders, Sergeant replied. Not breakers. They drafted a 3-step release, Step 1. Publish the cooler clip with timestamps and maps. Step 2. Pair Ortega's and Ellison's statements with documents. Step 3. A quiet email to the commission, sponsors, and 2 reporters who still called before tweeting. No adjectives. Just nouns with dates. Micah looked at his hands. They were steady. He felt the wobble under the city instead. Rings built on lies don't fall to knockout punches, they fail when crowds see scaffolding and refuse to clap. He breathed the way the bag taught him. Balance first, he said. Then we step in. They chose Friday because cities confess on Fridays. Zoe cued posts and emails, captions trimmed to facts. Sergeant Cole set 3 mugs like anchors. Once it leaves, she said, we don't chase it. We keep our line. Micah nodded. The room felt tight as a glove. The chain shivered. At 7:49 the first domino tipped, a reporter replied with 2 questions. At 7:53 the commission auto-acknowledged. At 7:55 Zoe tapped publish. The clip rolled, cooler, skullcap bottle, jokes about trainer cologne, timestamps crawling like a truth that refused to blink. For half a minute, nothing. Then everything. A gym in Milwaukee duet, we've seen that bottle. A coach in El Paso warned about nerve gels. A cut man in Manila typed, subtraction hurts. The chorus grew not from one voice but from a species of memory waking. Vince Harlow posted at 8:03, baseless. Jealousy in a hoodie. He paired it with a photo of Russo signing gloves for kids. Comments arrived obedient, then skeptical. Micah's phone rattled. Unknown numbers stacked. One message read, you picked a fight with people who buy nights. Another read, finally. They went. The Civic wore light like armor. Inside, the ring smoked under spotlights. Posters promised redemption and legacy. Zoe moved like a surgeon through aisles. Sergeant Cole walked behind like weather. Micah felt a settling in his chest, the way a door rests against its frame. The undercard ended on a doctor stoppage. Nobody cheered. The Jumbotron bloomed Russo, robe glittering, chin model firm. The crowd rose like a tide. Vince smiled different stories to different cameras. Across the arena, screens pinged. The commission posted, we are reviewing evidence regarding pre-bout substances and equipment tampering. Dry words, avalanche seed. A chant failed to launch. Russo entered bigger, as if defiance could overdub a feed. He thumped his chest, tapped ropes, kissed gloves. Superstition would find no mercy. Last chance to turn back, Zoe murmured. Doors are already closed, Micah said. The bell rang. It didn't just start a fight, it cut the room in half, noise on one side, breath on the other. Russo circled a durable veteran named Kinsey. He looked fast and furious, but there was drag in his left step, a tightness that knew lawyers. Micah felt it rather than saw it, an elastic hitch where confidence overeats. Round 1, Russo won loudly. Round 2, Kinsey found a lean and stole seconds at the edges. Between rounds, Vince signaled in a language of fingers. The cutman's bag flashed, gauze, tape, a small unlabeled bottle. Zoe whispered, got it, her camera drinking light. Sergeant Cole squeezed Micah's shoulder. Balance. Round 3 opened like a window in a storm. Kinsey's shovel hook landed and the arena realized it had a neck. The chant changed cadence, the story hunted a new author. Then the Jumbotron changed. Not highlights. Not sponsors. The cooler. Tino's clip. The jokes. A freeze frame of the skull in a past corner with a date stamp. Someone in production had decided truth was better content. Noise collapsed. Vince screamed for the feed to cut, the house mics caught his echo. The ref turned to the commission table, hands raised like a dancer surprised by daylight. Kinsey, professional to marrow, touched gloves with Russo and stepped back to wait. Russo snapped, "Fight," and threw a right that hit canvas. He slipped. The room saw him slip, and the myth lost traction. The bell clapped mid-exchange. Confusion piled up. The ref waved both to corners and gestured toward officials arguing paperwork into confetti. In the lull, Micah stood. 2 rows turned because the night had set him as a hinge. He didn't raise a fist. He raised his voice, low and steady, between bells, a clean jab. "You can stop this," he said to nobody and everyone. "Decide what the ring is for. Not a speech. A pressure release." The crowd breathed out. Boos began, not bloodthirsty but tired, the kind that nags a conscience. Vince bellowed. Slander, the commission bellowed statutes. The ring announcer found nothing presentable. Sergeant Cole watched like a general on a hill. "Don't gloat," she said. "We don't dance on graves, we build bridges away from them." Micah nodded. His wrist buzzed, reporters, Reynolds, a number saved as Dad's gym. He let them wait. He watched Russo in his corner, eyes small, jaw tight, trapped not by ropes but by narrative. The bell rang again, not to split the night but to sow it. The ref waved the bout off pending investigation. Kinsey lifted gloves and bowed to the room, then to Russo, then to the sky. Applause tasted like medicine, bitter, necessary. Russo tore off his gloves and flung them at the stool. They bounced like toys abandoned by a child surprised by a mirror. Vince tried to grab a mic. Security practiced amnesia. A camera operator filmed his own shoes. Zoe glanced at Micah. "This isn't the end. Endings are lazy," he said. "This is a hinge. Hinges do work." Outside, air smelled like rain deciding. Fans argued about refunds and ethics and whether heroes should come with receipts. A little boy shadowboxed under a streetlight while his father showed him how to turn the wrist gently and keep the thumb safe. Micah understood something new: the bell doesn't choose sides. It merely demands an answer. Tonight, the room answered, and the story changed owners. He slid his hands into his pockets and felt the ghost of tape. He could almost hear his father laugh when a combination landed and the bag swung as if agreeing. He breathed once, deep, and let the night stitch around the breath like cloth around a seam. Tomorrow would bring statements, lawyers, and the old machinery of denial. But tonight had split, and through the split, light came in. He walked home with Zoe and Sergeant Cole, 3 shadows in step, the city's hum quieter than usual, as if it too were counting to 10 between rounds and learning to listen. Morning news slid in like a slow avalanche. It didn't bury anyone at once, it shifted weight until foundations creaked. Headlines hedged, commission pauses title defense pending review. Sponsors seek clarity. Russo camp denies. No one said guilty. No one said clean. Micah read at the counter, toast turning to dough. Sergeant Cole circled names in the paper, wiring a circuit. Electricity follows least resistance, she said. Find the short. Zoe arrived smiling, backpack thumping. The clip hit 1 million. Ortega's ready, Ellison's ready, Reynolds if we blur the grandkids. 3 sponsors already scrubbed Russo from their feeds. Minnows turn water. Vince will pivot, Micah said. He already did, Zoe replied, showing a glossy cut calling the cooler, emergency medical supplies, scored with strings and half-truth. Then speak plainer, Sergeant said. We don't shout. We show. They built an interview corner like a small ship. Ortega came first, hat in hand, palms nicked by decades. I am hands, he said to the lens. Hands know when patting lies. A millimeter makes a man misread his own bones. He described the smell of the bottle, the last-minute switch, the blazer kid with the fake badge. Dr. Ellison followed, spine straight. In athletic medicine there's a principle older than contracts, do no harm. She held up the clause about proprietary pre-bout compounds. When secrecy enters the body through the hands, we are no longer healing. We are marketing. Reynolds sat last, filling the chair like a weathered door. Lightning was not fragile. He sparred smart, slept like a man who earned it. The night before. Rhythm wrong. The day of. Wrist failed on a hook he could throw in his sleep. Maybe fate. But fate should be rare. Zoe cut a clean beam, dates like stepping stones, slow intercuts of wraps, gloves, the skull-capped bottle. No flourishes. Truth, present tense. By afternoon, the piece traveled on its own legs. Reporters called to verify. A columnist asked Sargent for a quote about raising fighters who refuse to be weapons. Teach a child how to stand and you won't have to tell him who to hit, she said. Vince paced the airwaves. Cancel culture in sports, he declared. We're being tried by teenagers. He boasted a hospital wing, the wing replied the money was still a pledge. Evening rumor, interim suspension under consideration. Not the ocean swallowing the boat, water in the bilge. Russo trained for cameras. Clips showed thunder on a bag, captioned focus. Don't let lies win, he told fans. Shares climbed, comments fractured. Micah watched, listening more than looking. The foot drag read as calculation. The bag absorbed fury, the camera absorbed a man playing a man who loves fighting. He's trying to reframe the bell, he said. What? Zoe asked. He wants a different sound. They went to the old gym to bleed off the day. The heavy bag swung like a tethered moon. Micah worked rounds measured by breath. Zoe filmed footwork, then tapped a quick rhythm on the speed bag. The door opened and the noise changed. Russo's shadow entered first, big and careful. 3 men followed like commas. Vince stood behind, eyes counting exits. Nice place, Russo said, scanning like a realtor. Sweat darkened his shirt in a Rorschach of pride. Reynolds stepped between him and Micah with the ease of a bouncer who prefers apologies. Closed session. We're neighbors, Russo replied. Came to clear the air. Kid, you got heart. Don't drown in other people's oxygen. Micah unwrapped slowly, tape ribboning to the floor. You dragged me into a ring to make me a balloon, he said. I didn't pop. A muscle twitched at Russo's jaw. Careful. Fame is a fight you don't win with counters. I'm not fighting fame, Micah said. I'm avoiding infection. Vince offered a path. A spar. Closed doors, respectful. No cameras. Shake after. The internet moves on. No, Zoe said, already recording. Do your solving in public. Russo tried on sincerity for the lens. You're poisoning the well you drink from. Fans want heroes, not homework. Heroes file receipts, she said. Something small cracked, not a bone, a casing. Russo exhaled. The breath stuttered. Micah heard the hinge squeak again, once arrogance, now strain. I grew up sweeping this floor, Micah said. A ring isn't for shortcuts. It's not for teaching children that lies can be muscled into truth. It's where the bell asks a question. Reynolds nodded toward the exit. We're done. Leave like gentlemen so we remember this as almost a good idea. Russo stared a beat too long, then smiled like a cut man applying pressure. See you at the top. In daylight, Micah said. They left. The doors spring sighed. Silence returned heavier. Reynolds leaned on the ropes. First crack, he said. Crowns don't shatter all at once. They hairline. Then rain gets in. Zoe stopped recording and pressed her forehead to Micah's shoulder for a second, a medic checking pulse. We keep building. Tino will go on record. Long cut for morning, short for tonight. Tonight? Sergeant asked from the doorway, inevitable as weather. The emails to sponsors and the clinic pool go at 9, Zoe said. The video title is boring on purpose. The thumbnail is nothing but text, timeline. Micah tossed his wraps, missed, retrieved them, placed them right. The floor needed sweeping. He found the broom and made small circles around a bigger mess, whistling like his father. Electricity follows least resistance, he said. Truth does, too, Sergeant answered. Once it finds a path. Rain started, soft and stubborn. The roof pinged, a metronome. No high fives, no toasts. They checked mics, charged batteries, set alarms. The crown had cracked. The work, like breath between bells, would be to widen that hairline with patience and light. Before bed, Micah texted Kinsey, respect. Kinsey replied with a fist and a prayer hands. Outside, the billboard flickered, then steadied. The city hummed like a giant bell cooling after a strike. Micah exhaled once, slowly, and felt resolve seat itself for tomorrow. They timed the upload for the scene between rush hour and the late scroll. At 8:59 p.m., Zoe checked batteries, toggled airplane mode, and tapped the mic. Sergeant Cole stood at the window counting slow breaths. Micah sat on the floor with his hands wrapped, not to hit, but to turn nerves into pattern. It's only truth, Zoe said, as if saying, only fire. It will behave like fire, Sergeant answered. So we build a break. 9 o'clock. Publish. The video opened plain, white titles on black, dates like fence posts. Clip 1, Tino's body cam catching the cooler bumping over a threshold, an unlabeled bottle in a trainer's palm, laughter trying to make guilt sound local. Freeze frame, timestamp, location. Clip 2, Ortega in daylight explaining subtraction, how a millimeter of padding stolen is a sermon to knuckles and a hex on tendons. Clip 3, Dr. Ellison, steady, pointing to a clause that turned hands into secrets. Clip 4, a past ringside photo where the skull-capped bottle photobombed history. Then the hinge, a grainy locker room tape from years ago. A voice said, warm the hands for spectacle. Another asked, commission. A third replied, keep the door busy. The timestamp matched the night lightning. Cole's rhythm went wrong. A profile crossed frame, smoothing a tie, Vince Harlow. Zoe closed with Reynolds's line, maybe fate. But fate should be rare. Then source links and a note, if you have corroboration, right. For a beat, nothing. Then everything. Cutmen Unions reposted Ortega, ethics is technique. An old champion wrote, I've seen pride ruin hands. This is different. A venue janitor commented about sticky residue on benches after a televised fight. The commission tweeted, emergency session 10 o'clock. Topics, hand prep protocols, chemical agents, sanction integrity. Vince attempted a damn, doctored, out of context, smear. The denial trended below a freeze frame of his shoulder in that doorway. Sponsors shifted faster. One paused, activations. Another wrote a paragraph that said nothing and everything. Reporters requested the source folder. The algorithm did the rest. At 2 a.m., a courier texted, I ferried the bottle and wrapped the night lightning's wrist failed. I owe the dead one sentence. Meet 5 a.m. bus depot lunch truck. Alone. Micah answered, 2 of us. Visible hands. He signed with his name and a tiny glove. Dawn found engines idling and coffee steaming. The courier faced the refrigerator unit like it could cross-examine him. I was the runner, he said. A supervisor implied fines. The trainer on your father's side argued. The wrap was used anyway. 10 minutes later he shook his hand like it belonged to someone else. He agreed to go on record. Zoe filmed with the truck owner staring into the lens like a notary. By 8, she cut a 45-second addendum. Update, an eyewitness confirms chain of custody. She paired it with a Yelp check-in showing the courier on site that night. Upload. Pin. At 9:40, the commission conference room filled with people who smelled like authority and anxiety. Rows of chairs faced a dais of microphones that amplified fear as well as sound. Zoe and Micah took the third row. Sergeant stood at the back like weather. Vince entered with counsel in good suits and worse souls. Russo arrived in sunglasses, expression blank enough to fog. Kinsey sat with his coach and folded hands. Tino hugged the wall, Ortega slid beside him without speaking. Dr. Ellison brought files. Reynolds came because this storm was also his. The chair banged a gavel. Words arranged themselves, allegations, protocols, preliminary findings. A compliance officer rolled in exemplars, legal wraps, regulated gloves, a clear bottle labeled evidence, admission posing as neutrality. Public comment opened. Tino, my camera is my raised hand. Ortega, I don't accuse men, I describe hands. Dr. Ellison read the clause aloud and looked up. If you must hide a liquid, it has no business in sport. Vince's. Counsel called everything context. Vince called everyone jealous. Russo said he believed in fair play, then snapped, this is a witch hunt for clicks. The microphones heard the stutter under his breath. Kinsey's coach surprised the room. My guy fought clean. If you don't clean the room, we won't be back. Reynolds stood last. We bring kids to gyms to learn discipline, not improvisational corruption. If the body learns lies in the hands, it will tell lies everywhere. Recess. Russell. Return. The decision landed fast enough to be theater and slow enough to pretend law, interim suspension of Russo's license, formal investigation into Harlow Promotions, a moratorium on unlisted compounds within a mile of locker rooms, immediate audits of glove suppliers, retroactive review of bouts flagged in the timeline. The gavel fell. The room made the sound a bag makes when agreement arrives, thud, thud. Outside, cameras swarmed like bees. Vince stung himself on a leading question. Russo dragged his cap low and found no shadow big enough. Kinsey shook Micah's hand. The bell rang for more than fighting today. They walked back to the gym without celebrating. Silence waited like duty. Micah rapped again, lightly, and tapped the bag once to hear Leather answer. The sound said what he needed. The story had pivoted from rumor to record. Forgetting would now require work. He unwrapped and placed the tape in the small wooden box where his father kept spare laces and a church bulletin. He rested his palm on the lid like a vow. Zoe lay on the canvas. Sergeant turned off the overhead so the room wore afternoon honestly. Now what? Micah asked. We prepare for their next move, Sergeant said. And for ours. Ours? Zoe asked. Teach, Sergeant answered. And remember that mercy can hit harder than any punch. They sat a while, listening to the chain hush. The tape had changed everything, not just theirs, the rings. The bell, when it rang next, would ring cleaner. That was enough for tonight. Outside, rain began, patient and fine, washing posters as the city exhaled at last. The interim suspension rattled the calendar like a drop tray. Fights shuffled, sponsors paused their spotlights, and gyms argued in low voices. Micah trained as if time itself were a myth he had to meet, roadwork before dawn, school, homework, the bag, footwork until fatigue softened its edges. Asked if he wanted Russo banned for life, he said, I want the ring to mean what it says it means. Zoe turned their feeds into a class called Open Hands, how to rap safely, why rest matters, what consent looks like in combat. She folded Ortega and Dr. Ellison into a syllabus, added Reynolds's proverbs, and booked rec centers. Kids came because drama brought them to the door, and stayed because the bell, stripped of noise, sounded like a drum they already knew. One night, as the gym closed, a man hovered in the doorway like a decision. Not Vince. Not a reporter. Dax Russo, no entourage, one hand in a brace, the other carrying a plastic bag. Reynolds moved to intercept. Sergeant Cole's look said she could end a riot with a whisper. I came to return something, Russo said. He set the bag on the ring's apron and stepped back. Inside lay gloves without logos, leather softened by years, laces frayed to thread. Jerome Cole's name, in faded marker, ghosted one palm. Where did you get these? Micah asked. From a storage unit we kept because we keep everything, Russo said. They were tossed after a televised cleanup. They're yours. The city hummed beyond the door. Why now? Zoe said. I'm tired, Russo answered. Of being a brand with fists. Of pretending the echo is a choir. You came alone, Sergeant said. I don't know how to be in a room without making it a stage, he said. I'm learning. Micah lifted the gloves like artifacts. He smelled liniment and old wood. He saw his father's hands ghosting above his own. He laced one glove loosely, enough to feel weight. People want a showdown, Russo said. They want you to hit me where everyone can see. It would be clean, and it would feed the thing that broke me. We don't feed it, Micah said. Russo looked surprised, then wary, then relieved. I've got a hearing next week, he said. They'll want contrition pretty. My lawyer will script me. Don't read his lines, Zoe said. Say a sentence you can hear yourself say 10 years from now without tasting metal. He exhaled, a breath that didn't stutter. What do you want from me? Hold an exhibition, Micah said. Not a fight. A clinic, free. Stand in the ring and describe every shortcut you took, and refuse to perform it. Say where you learned it, why you believed it, and who paid when you pretended nobody did. Then teach what should have happened instead. Russo stared as if mercy were a language he hadn't heard. You're not going to hit me. If I hit you, I turn into the thing I say I'm not, Micah said. I might fight in public one day. Not to fix what lies cannot borrow anymore. Ortega, called by Zoe with 2 words, "Come, please," arrived midway and leaned against the post. Make sure there's an AED and a bucket, he said. Truth raises heart rates. They booked the rec center a week later. The bleachers filled with parents, trainers, kids in team tees. Reporters sat like students. Handouts printed the skull-capped bottle with a red X beside legal wraps and gauze. Zoe emceed without glitter. This is not spectacle, she said. This is consent, information, and a promise. Ortega showed a glove's anatomy. Dr. Ellison walked through hand health. Reynolds told a story about sweeping sweat moons. Then Russo stepped between ropes. No robe. No music. Just a man with a brace he refused to hide. He stood in center ring and described subtraction, the millimeter of padding, the seam snip, the gel that made a hand misread its own report. He named rooms. He said how shame hides in jokes. He did not flatter himself with, "I was young." He said, "I liked winning more than being right." The bleachers did not boo. Near the end, he lifted Jerome Cole's gloves. "These went missing on my watch," he said. "I believed I could keep everything I took. I was wrong. I'm returning what I can, and telling you what I can't." He looked at Micah. "You could humiliate me. You didn't. That's the punch I'll feel when the lights go off." The room held still. Mercy took off its shoes. Micah stepped in and, at arm's length, demonstrated how to frame without fouling, how to exit on an angle without shoving, how to answer a low blow with a raised hand and a word to the ref instead of retaliation. He turned to the kids. "If the bell asks who you are, answer with something you'll want to remember." After, as the crowd filtered out, a boy with a chipped tooth asked Russo for a photo. Russo nodded, then turned the lens toward the table of gauze. "Get that in the frame," he said. "Make your mother proud." On the walk home, Zoe said, "You know the comments will still bite." "They can chew," Micah said. "We fed them something useful." Sergeant Cole locked the gate and watched the clouds. "Mercy isn't softness," she said. "It's discipline with its hands open." The train wailed like a bell taking a long breath. In the quiet that followed, Micah felt something release, not his guard, not his purpose, but a knot he'd carried since the night a stranger made him a prop. He had refused the stage and accepted the work. He slept that night. The city did not change all at once. But somewhere, a boy wrapped his hands and a coach threw a bottle away. In the morning, the hearing notice arrived with a new line at the bottom, "Voluntary educational session received. Cooperation noted." Mercy landed. The bruise it made would teach. Said, "I liked winning more than being right." The bleachers did not boo. Near the end, he lifted Jerome Cole's gloves. "These went missing on my watch," he said. "I believed I could keep everything I took. I was wrong. I'm returning what I can, and telling you what I can't." He looked at Micah. "You could humiliate me. You didn't. That's the punch I'll feel when the lights go off. The room held still. Mercy took off its shoes. Micah stepped in and, at arm's length, demonstrated how to frame without fouling, how to exit on an angle without shoving, how to answer a low blow with a raised hand and a word to the ref instead of retaliation. He turned to the kids. If the bell asks who you are, answer with something you'll want to remember. After, as the crowd filtered out, a boy with a chipped tooth asked Russo for a photo. Russo nodded, then turned the lens toward the table of gauze. Get that in the frame, he said. Make your mother proud. On the walk home, Zoe said, you know the comments will still bite. They can chew, Micah said. We fed them something useful. Sergeant Cole locked the gate and watched the clouds. Mercy isn't softness, she said. It's discipline with its hands open. The train wailed like a bell taking a long breath. In the quiet that followed, Micah felt something release. Not his guard, not his purpose, but a knot he'd carried since the night a stranger made him a prop. He had refused the stage and accepted the work. He slept that night. The city did not change all at once. But somewhere, a boy wrapped his hands and a coach threw a bottle away. In the morning, the hearing notice arrived with a new line at the bottom, voluntary educational session received. Cooperation noted. Mercy landed. The bruise it made would teach. The city never goes silent, not even when a scandal winds down. Sirens fade into buses, chants into shoe squeaks on pavement, outrage into errands. After the roar, people needed dinner, gyms still smelled like effort. Micah woke to a morning where news crawlers had shrunk his name to a lower third and the calendar had reclaimed hours for ordinary breath. He ran the river path and watched light wedge between buildings like a slow hand prying. On the far bank, workers in hard hats raised a frame, bolt by measured bolt. He thought of crowns and hairline cracks, of rain finding seams, of how repair means learning to love the unglamorous. When he reached the park, he shadowboxed one round, small, neat movements the world would never see, and felt gratitude sit down beside resolve without argument. At the gym, Reynolds had chalked a new rule above the ring: we teach with hands and with how we use them. Ortega brought a donated bin of legal wraps and gloves. Dr. Ellison taped a flyer about a free clinic for wrists and thumbs. Zoe drew arrows on a whiteboard titled Open Hands and wrote times for Saturday classes. Sergeant Cole brewed coffee that tasted like a decision. The door opened, and kids poured in like a possibility let out of school. Some had followed drama, some came because their cousins had, some needed a place to put a weekend that felt too big. Micah showed them how to bounce without slamming their heels, how to rest their jaw, how to exhale quietly at impact so the breath didn't bottleneck panic. He let them laugh, then convinced them to listen, then earned the right to let them laugh again. Zoe's film class grew from a corner project into a crew. She trained teenagers to mic interviews, to frame truth, to cut out the part of themselves that wanted to be louder than the subject. We are not the story, she said. We make a shape the story can sit in. They documented the clinic without hero edits and learned that boring can be beautiful when boring means honest. At night, Micah returned the gloves with his father's faded name to their box and slid the box onto a shelf near the bag. He didn't make the shelf into an altar because he didn't want worship, he wanted use. He wrote a line on a card and taped it inside the lid: the bell asks, who are you now? He touched the leather once, not for magic, but for memory given a proper room. Russo kept coming back. He didn't teach like a penitent saint or a fallen king, he taught like a tradesman grateful to still have a trade. He corrected elbows and admitted tricks and left early. The day's doubt talked too fast in his ear. He never asked for forgiveness in a speech. He argued with a teenager about whether southpaws are mischief or math and smiled when the teenager used evidence instead of volume. One rainy afternoon, the courier from the lunch truck brought his little boy to sign up. He paid with crumpled bills and a receipt book. "I want him to learn how to stand before he learns how to hit," he said. Sergeant nodded and slid the form back with the fee line crossed out. Letters arrived. One was from Kinsey, who wrote about getting back in the gym after a weird week and invited Micah to visit his old coach. One was from a retired ring inspector who had looked away when a star shouted and now wanted training in how not to. One came from a teacher who had used open hands to quiet a classroom fight before anyone bled. Micah stacked them and read one each night like a slow dessert. He still walked past the arena sometimes. The marquee had moved on to country concerts and a winter auto show. He stood across the street and practiced the work of not needing to be needed by its glow. Then he went home, where the light fell less dramatically and more usefully. Zoe pitched a longer film, not about scandal but about maintenance, how seasons turn in a gym, how tape frays and is replaced, how kids learn to count their breaths. A small grant followed. They bought better mics. They bought a clock that ticked quietly. They bought a broom with a handle that didn't wobble. For the premiere, they planned to serve lemonade in paper cups and name the chairs after virtues rather than donors. On a Sunday, the clinic ran long. A tiny girl in pink laces refused to leave until she landed one clean jab and made the bag nod as if agreeing. When it nodded, she honored the pause and smiled without looking around to see who had seen it. Micah watched and recognized something he couldn't have written into existence, a ring not as theater but as classroom, bell as question, applause as optional. As dusk leaned in, he taped a kid's gloves, lacing carefully, asking about homework, about a grandmother's soup recipe, about a math test. He finished the knot and pressed the glove to the kid's chest like a notary. "You know the rule," he said. "Feet first." The bell rang for drills. It sounded cleaner now, not because the city had become pure, but because enough people had become stubborn about being decent in public. That stubbornness had a rhythm. It would miss beats, shame would improvise, profit would compose new arguments. The answer wouldn't be a knockout. It would be 100 small answers given daily by hands that had learned to prefer open. After class, they swept. Reynolds called it recovery, Zoe called it B-roll, Sargent called it discipline pretending to be housekeeping. Micah called it peace. He pushed the broom in patient arcs while rain braided the alley and pigeons argued softly under the eaves. He locked the door and listened to the room, which sounded like a breath at the bottom of a count. He thought of his father and felt grief and its neighbor, gratitude, share a bench. He didn't bow to the bag. He didn't promise to fight for a title. He promised to keep the bell honest whenever he stood near it. On the walk home, he passed a mural of a boxer whose eyes looked forward instead of down. Someone had painted a small line beneath it, "Be worth the F down." Someone had painted a small line beneath it, "Be worth the echo." He smiled, not because the line solved anything, but because it suggested work. The night took its shape. The scandal receded into case law and memory. The ring remained. The city, incapable of true silence, hummed a steadying note. In an upstairs window, a lamp switched off. In the gym's dark, a chain settled. After the roar, the quiet had room for a promise. Micah kept it.